Welcome back, you filthy exiles. So, you guys had a look at the poll I put up today, and I'm going to let you guys decide on some of the videos that are coming out on the channel moving forwards. And, yeah, trying to theory craft something using the spear on the warrior, in particular the Smith of Kitava, is pretty much what people want to see. Now, we don't have patch notes. We also don't know what the point breaks are on the new spear skills, but based on what we can see in the gameplay footage, there is some sort of like fire spear something going on, right? So let's assume that there is a fire spear in the game, right? On this basis, we can do something with that. We can build something with that because that could be really cool. Now, obviously the Ascendancy I wanted to run through was on the warrior, and sort of looking at it, I've got a guide that I'm working on just on how to basically run a really tanky early game warrior. I think spears are going to be a really good solution to running like one-handed maces, similar to like the quarterstaff. I feel like spears are going to be quite powerful and easily accessible, and also the warrior is getting maybe one of the tankiest ascendancies being added into it. And on top of that, there's some really cool uniques that are being added into the game, 4 in particular, 3 of which are new, that totally synergize with defense and conversion into offense statistics, and, you know, different modifiers. So basically, there's some really cool stuff that you can do with this. So I decided to sort of put together a bit of a POB. Now, everything in this video is purely theoretical. I have absolutely no idea if it's going to work. It's just really cool, and I wanted to go through it. But anyway, let's talk about the build and or the build idea, and get into the video. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you click the button down below if you want to see more content for Path of Exile 2. I'm super keen on it now. The patch looks amazing, and hopefully the patch notes echo exactly what we've seen in the content reveal. Okay, so I guess in looking at this build, the idea behind this sort of concept is we're going to make a really, really tanky Smith of Kitava that does a decent amount of damage. So there's a few things that we need to consider as far as this goes. Number one, like, how does AoE damage scale? In particular, you know, can we use armor break, for example, and then armor explode? That's an accessible item that's on the warrior, for example. Now, also with this, scaling fire damage is a no-brainer because fire damage is really easy to get. It's accessible on the warrior tree, and we can also get things like Avatar of Fire, which give us a ton of damage. So basically then what that means is we need a high physical DPS spear to do this. Now, we don't really know much about spears yet because the patch notes aren't out. We don't know what the peaks, as in the highs and lows for damage modifiers, are on spears, and this is something else that we're going to have to work with. Now, accuracy is actually not that hard to get around because we have strength, right? So we can actually strength stack and then crank up our accuracy, so that will then synergize with spears, and that's totally doable with certain nodes in the tree. In particular, the node that comes to mind is called Unexpected Finesse, which gives us gain accuracy equal to your strength. So that's easily accessible if we build the tree right. Other things to consider is maxing out block. So for example, Lay Siege is another really good node that we could use to get damage from block, which then also begs the question, do we use some of the new uniques that are in the game? And in particular, there's a couple that I really want to look at. One in particular that you can use Finality with, so we can low life, or essentially treat enemies as though they have low life, and then do a ridiculous increase in DPS to them. So it's 60% plus 120%, and that basically means we get 180% damage multiplier for free from just using one helm, which is really good. And I'm going to do a separate short talking about this concept as well, but we'll cover off on it in here. And then basically beyond that point, we just need to tank up and then find other sources of damage, attack speed, armor break, fire damage, and all the other good stuff that we need for such a build, and increase the scaling of AoE. So if we can get armor break to work, we can basically abuse that. Now, there's other things I don't know, in particular about the support gem setups and stuff like that, so that's going to have to just be something that we look at later down the track. But in the purpose of this video, we'll talk about the idea using which ascendancy, or sorry, in this case, we'll talk about the uniques that are really synergized with a build like this early on, in particular new uniques that are being added into the game. We'll talk about the ideal ascendancy, and then I'll give you a bit of a tree to work to which I've taken from POB and just retuned. Now, obviously, there's things I'll talk about in that tree, which, you know, we'll have to switch out the main weapon for spears. We don't need Giant's Blood because the spear is a one-handed weapon from what we know. And then basically, you know, there's other things that we'll need to switch out there. We'll talk about that at the very end of the video, or, you know, if you look at the timestamp, we'll talk about that then. But again, this is a theory crafted build, so I have no idea how this is going to work or if this is going to work. But, you know, this is just a starting baseline to go, okay, how would we go about this if we were to try and build a build like this? And hopefully, maybe, I won't convince myself that this is a great idea and then play this on League Start and then, you know, run the 50-50 gauntlet as to whether or not it'll work or not, because the more that I'm talking about this build, it really makes me want to play it. And whether or not I screw it up or not, it doesn't really matter. And I'll let you guys tell me in the comments below, should I give this a go and see if I can make it, or do I just want to stick with a standard Thunder Javazon, which is what I originally planned? You guys tell me, is this worth the time and effort, or just play something that's probably going to work easily from the get-go? But anyway, we'll see how we go. Okay, so as noted earlier on, there are some new uniques that are making their way into Path of Exile 2 based on the announcements and teasers and whatnot. And there's a few here that will synergize with this type of configuration. Now, the first one that comes to mind is by the name of Chernobog's Pillar, Black Steel Tower Shield. Now, this was actually an item in Path of Exile 1. It wasn't really very well utilized because it wasn't a very good item. But in Path of Exile 2, it's been redesigned and it's quite functional. Now, number one, you get a ton of stun threshold, which is absolutely fantastic. Number two, you get a lot of chaos resistance, which is also fantastic. Number three, it's got a pretty respectable amount of armor, base block chance 26%, which are all good modifiers. But the big thing here is gain 1% of damage as fire damage per 1% chance to block. Now, if you're playing a really tanky build with a shield, this is actually like free damage. Like, it's defense and free damage. Now, we do run things in the tree that give us a requirement for fire resistance. For example, we would be running Unnatural Resilience, where we need to basically get as much fire resistance as we possibly can. And with the Ascendancies that we'll talk about soon that we would probably be using, this is definitely a good shield for actually doing that, because we get a 38% fire res roll, which is really, really powerful. This would be one of the uniques that I'd be looking at using straight away, pretty much in this build. Now, the next unique that looks really cool that we could probably fit on this build is the Deepest Tower. This is the new Spirit Bone Crown Shield that's coming into the game. Now, it does get a pretty okay amount of Chaos Res, so with the shield and the helm, we get like a ton of Chaos Res, which is really, really useful, in particular with the Ascendancies that we're going to be using anyway. But the big thing here is enemies in your presence count as being on low life. Now, why is this so significant? Well, based on the tree, there are some nodes that are actually really good at taking advantage of this. So the first one would be, in particular, this node here, Finality. And basically what Finality is 120% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. Now, you also get 30% and 30%. This is basically just total free damage from running what would be considered a pretty good helm. Now, there's a couple of other points on the tree that also synergize with this. Now, we could also travel to these nodes in the tree where stars aligned and our finishing blows are too. So basically, we would get every single one of these modifiers would give you a flat 30% damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. Then we also get damage with hits is lucky against enemies that are on low life, and also finishing blows with 60% damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. So this is a absolute ton of damage for very minimal investment. We could sort of travel up here. We could ditch off some other damage nodes as well and basically get a really easy clustering of damage. We've also got accuracy up in this cluster as well. So potentially this helm is going to be a real chase helm at the end of the day, because it basically gives you access to obscene amounts of damage, which you could run on many, many different builds. Now, outside of this, we're also getting some unique charms getting added into the game. In particular, this one is Beera's Anguish Dousing Charm. So 23% chance to gain a charge when you kill an enemy, and ignite enemies in presence as though dealing fire damage equal to 25% of your maximum life when used. So the big advantage for this is being able to essentially ignite enemies when you become ignited. Now, if we can somehow set up a self-ignite configuration, this could actually be a really, really useful charm that we could use quite a lot. And if we are totally able to avoid the damage of being ignited, which is actually built into the Smith of our Kitava Ascendancy, then potentially this could actually be really useful. Even if we just regenerate faster than the ignite can afflict us, then if we could run a self-ignite configuration, this could be really, really powerful. So the last unique that we could use to get a absolute metric ton of AoE would be Trample Toe. Now, I've been playing around with a concept of this running Magma Shield or Magma Barrier, and basically it's really cool. You can get like full screen explosions and stuff like that. I'm yet to get there, but you know, there's plenty of examples out there for this type of configuration. Now, this unique could be really cool to basically get huge amounts of AoE, in particular if we manage to get Armor Break or something of that nature working. Then basically we would get 30% of overkill damage to enemies within 2 meters of the enemy killed. So that means we could do huge screen-wide explosions with spears, potentially. And this could be a really good item to sort of trial and test and see if it actually works and if it synergizes with the way that this configuration might be able to work in the end. So in relation to the Ascendancy for the Smith of Kitava, there's a few different ways that we could go about this, but looking at this at face value, Coal Stoker looks like a pretty good option because we're going to be scaling up a lot of fire resistance, and potentially Forged in Flame might be another good option. However, we've already got enough overcap on the tree, so arguably if we didn't take Forged in Flame, we could just simply go Living Apologies against the Anvil, and we could use the Grant skill Tempered Weapon, and potentially this could be really powerful with Explodey Spears. Now, beyond this point, we then have 4 points that we could use, and this is if we didn't take Forged in Flame, so we just take Coal Stoker and Tempered Weapon or against the Anvil, then we would have 4 points to allocate in the rest of our points. So I would be recommending we take Flowing Metal, Molten Symbol, and then we also take Tantalum alloy, which would give us a absolute ton of fire resistance, and then we could pretty much play around with anything else we wanted to take. So we could take Internal Layer, which would make us incredibly tanky. We could take Leather Bindings, which would give us a ton of resistances, or we could take something like, you know, Padded Plates or Lead Lining, and that would mean that we would really not have to worry too much about scaling up our resistances in other areas. That being said, that's pretty redundant because realistically we're going to take, you know, we may take Forged in Flame. There's also the option of taking Heat Proofing. If we can come up with a way to do a self-ignite configuration, then Body Armor grants unaffected by ignite, and that means that potentially it's not that you can't be ignited, it's just that you're unaffected if you're ignited. So if you had a configuration that did ignite you, which in particular with the charm that we just recommended, this would be a great synergy for getting a free damage buff, and there could be other uniques which will actually allow you to run a self-ignite configuration like that. Okay, so finally I decided to put together a bit of a skill tree so you'd have something to work to. So I did do a bit of testing around leveling up a warrior, and this configuration did work really well early on, sort of in leveling. And then this one is basically scaled to deal with accuracy. It takes advantage of some of the unique items, such as using finality, and basically just gets you to a pretty tanky place. So we have 25.7k EHP on this. By the way, like the uniques that are on it is Zoph's Blood. I'd actually recommend keeping Zoph's Blood because it gives you a ton of life. It also gives you enemies exposed to fire around you as well, which is going to give you a lot of damage. It does have a Moria Victus on it, which is totally irrelevant. It will drop your effective hit pool and when you drop it off. Bearing in mind the Ascendancy that you get, pardon me, from the actual like Smith of Kitava totally just rails this body armor. Like this body armor is nothing compared to that Ascendancy. Also, I've taken away the hulking form node, so we don't need to worry about that distorting the tree right now. So it does, Stone Skin does basically nothing, and so does Mysterious Lineage, and we would get a lot of that from our Ascendancy anyway, so it's irrelevant. So basically, Smith of the Avatar, like is going to be way better than this. Now that being said, so yeah, some of the other items in here, Ingenuity we have as the belt. Really, you could do anything with that at that point. You can still run whatever rings, and basically we're just running all rares. Now, it does have a Great Hammer in here, which if we did this type of setup, we wouldn't be using. We would be using a Spear. And this is a perfect strike tree, by the way, so you could use this if you want to play perfect strike. This would be a really, really tanky POB, so you could take this and do whatever you want. And I think I tuned it up, and it actually gets to a better level of DPS than what was originally in here. 265k DPS is nothing to quiver at. That's pretty good damage. It's not like 5 million DPS, but you're still going to have a good time. You got 5.5k HP and a pretty good amount of life regeneration, so you're going to be laughing your way through everything. There are some limitations in this tree too. We would have to balance out decks a bit better. Strength requirements not a big issue because we have Giant's Blood ticked just so that it doesn't mess up the tree, but you don't need Giant's Blood, so it's actually a level 98 tree, and I know that is quite hard to get to, level 98, so you would just basically slip off some of these unbending nodes and things like that to get rid of that. Now, because I don't know how the native crit scales on the spears nor the actual skill itself, we have Resolute Technique still built into it, so we do a 100% hit. Arguably, we're just going to scale out elemental damage. This is also a blood magic tree, so we would need to be able to sustain the skill from, you know, killing us, so we may have to get more regeneration into the build, which is totally doable. But anyway, just talking through it, so we basically start in the warrior starting area, come down and get Defender's Resolve. Grabbing this Mass Hysteria early on is really useful, and then we come down and we would get this Lay Siege. This would be your early game configuration too. Now, I do have cruel methods for armor break. I don't know how effective this would be, and if we're running Tempered Weapon, then basically, do we even need it? I don't know. This is just all stuff that we would have to test. And then basically, you would also then take this Devastation node. This is give you increased AoE, and then we come across... We want Defender's Resolve. We want to go to Unstoppable Barrier because we want to get as much block into the build as possible. We don't need as much strength in this setup, so we could come in and grab Blade Catcher as well. And then we go down into Beef because for all good warrior builds, you need to have Beef. And then we come down and we grab Vigilance. This is going to give us more block, and it's also going to give us 6 life gain from block. And we come down and we grab Finality. Now, Finality synergizes with the Helm that we recommended, which basically applies low life to all enemies around you. So 120% increased damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. Now, you get this relatively early on. It's just extremely powerful, which is why I mean, like, that Helm is pretty good. And this will take you to Act 4, no sweat. Like, you won't have too many issues with Act 4. That being said, I don't know how spears operate, and if they operate the way that I think they do, this could be really good. Now, we have Unbending into Resolute Technique, up into Impact Area and Impact Force, and then basically Prism Guard, so this gives us a lot of overcapped reses and deals with our cold and our lightning. But there's ways that we deal with that in the tree anyway for the Smith of Kitava, which makes it really strong. So then we come up and get Blood Magic, and we take this Jewel Socket up here. And the Jewel Sockets, you could get overcap reses like this, or you could do a bunch of other stuff too. So, you know, world's your oyster. You can also get more block chance. Currently, this POB, I think, has 59% block chance. And so we would basically be looking at getting a way better shield with a lot more block, though this shield is 43%. So we would need to work on that because we would be a bit deficient on the block department. And the shield we would be running would give us good chaos resistance, same with the helm. So basically, we want to focus up and get a lot more stuff on, you know, other parts of the gear and whatnot, but, you know, gem levels and all that sort of jazz. But without having to run a lot of fire res on the build and stuff like that, you know, we could really scale up damage in the rest of the build ultimately, because honestly, Smith of Kitava is awesome. So we come down, we pick up the Jewel Socket down here, we come up, we grab Avatar of Fire, and then we just travel down. So we get Brute Strength, we don't need Giant's Blood, we would get Unnatural Resilience, and this is going to give us 2% maximum fire for each 40% uncapped fire resistance. Then another Jewel Socket into Smoked Inhalation. This is going to give us Fire Penetration. Down into Iron Reflexes. This just converts all of our evasion to armor if we have any evasion in the build. But ideally, you're probably not going to need this point. So it's going to be pretty irrelevant. And then we come up and grab Sand in the Eyes. This gives us attack speed, and so do the preceding nodes, and some blind. And then basically we come up. We grab all the strength nodes up there, and we go straight up into Unexpected Finesse. Now, this is going to give you gain accuracy equal to your strength. And because we're going to have quite a lot of strength in this build, it's probably not going to be as much as this. We would get a lot of accuracy out of this. So basically, that deals with our spears being less accurate. And we'd also gain accuracy from the preceding nodes into this. And then we come up and we grab the Parrying Motion node, which is going to give us 1% increased movement speed for each time you've blocked in the past 10 seconds. So we get a bit of a speed buff and stuff like that. We could also like buff up charms We could take more armor. We could also buff up heralds as well. So there's a fair bit of stuff we could do with this build, or we could then respec some points out of here. We could take these points out and then just go straight up and spec into damage here. And we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then basically just like totally abuse these damage nodes here, which could be an option as well. You know, these are some of the things that we could do. We could strip off these nodes, strip off these nodes, and chuck it into these nodes, because probably this 50% increased attack damage is going to be less prevalent or less useful than these nodes, because you're going to get a lot more damage from these nodes if enemies are on low life. So, you know, thinking on this, right, we could probably get rid of these nodes, take these nodes, and then we could then, how much, oh, we got 100 point left. Yeah, okay. We'd have to work with that anyway. That's something just to consider. Oh, now we have too many points, so I've done something wrong. Anyway, basically, yeah, we could play around with this for days and try and like rework this and whatnot. But anyway, that's just some things to keep in mind. So we dropped that off. So we got 125 points. Yeah, there's just a bit of balancing that needs to be done in this tree, so we get rid of that. And we could also get rid of that. We don't need that. That's fine. Get more damage out of that. And then we're at, you know, 100 points. Anyway, that's the basic gist of the tree, for example. So you could run a tree like this, or you can make some adjustments. But this is just to give you some ideas of how to spec your tree out. Now, there are gear items in here to go by. So if you got a bit of an idea of how to gear up, this would sort of work. And obviously, there's no uniques in here. So if you were farming like N-tier sort of stuff, if this build is capable of doing that with the damage yield that it does put out, then, you know, potentially the world's your oyster, could be quite powerful. But that being said, it's an untested sort of notion. So yeah, this is try at your own risk at the end of the day. But it could actually turn out to be quite cool. And yeah, it could be actually a really good build. But I have no idea until we test it. We don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to provide some theory concept here. Now, this also doesn't take into account if we're able to generate rage. So if we're able to generate rage, I think what we get, like, what, 30 rage, for example. Our damage goes way up again as well. If we can get Onslaught into the build, that's great. If we can get Endurance charges, we need to find a way to expend Endurance charges. And if we're on low life, we're not going to do well, to be honest with you. Is the enemy on low life? If they are, the damage will just go up to ridiculous levels. If the enemy is ignited, then potentially we can scale up damage based on ignites as well. And if we can cover the enemy in ash somehow, we can get the damage up to totally ridiculous levels. And we can probably do that with war cries and whatnot too. Have you been stunned recently, or have you war cried recently? Yeah, there's a lot of things we could do to try and like juice this up to get the damage up. But yeah, anyway, this is basically the gist of how the tree would work. So I'll put a copy of this POB in the description below. You can have a play with it, or when POB gets updated, you can then work with this and see if you can make something work with it. I'll probably use this to tweak around with as well and see if I can do some more stuff to it. And yeah, if we decide to play the build, this would be a really strong way to start. And I've already checked, and this sort of configuration early on is a really, really strong starting configuration going for block. So if you're playing warrior, I'll do a video on this a little bit later in the week, but this is a good way to basically start. Okay, so just reiterating, this is totally theoretical, but the concept looks really cool. And quite frankly, if this works and if we're able to do this, and if the dex requirements aren't too ridiculous, but it won't even really matter. We get tons of strength natively anyway with this tree setup. Warrior could be a really good spear build sort of archetype, especially with the amount of fire scaling and things like that that you get, the amount of defense you would get from it too. You could basically just face tank stuff. Being able to run unwavering stance would be really cool as well, and it's definitely something that I wouldn't mind looking at. So basically we don't even dodge roll anymore because we're so tanky we don't need to dodge roll. That would be really dope. But anyway, yeah, if you like this type of content, you want to see more videos like this, feel free to hit me up below in the comments, and don't forget to like and sub to the channel. And until the next video, and there's a few more planned before the league start, and I'll be there at like 5 or 6 a.m. on league start morning, then yeah, I'll see you guys then, and have a great week.